Now in this lecture, we are going to learn about continue and break. So we are going to use continue and break keywords inside loop over here. Now sometimes when you are in an iteration of a loop, you want to finish the current iteration and immediately jump to the next iteration. In that case, you can use continue statement to skip to the next iteration without finishing the body of loop for the current iteration. Continue statement is used to skip the rest of code inside the loop for current iteration only. Loop does not terminate, but it continues on with next iteration. The general syntax of continue statement in for loop will be like this. So here we have a for loop like this. So we are looping through the list of items and we are doing something to each item over here inside this loop over here. So if some condition met over here, we are going to put continue. Then we do another thing inside this loop over here. So the question is, when the execution reaches to its continue statement, what will happen? So in this case, our execution will go back to the next iteration over here. So this means that if the condition is met, this part of code, which is after this condition, will not be executed. So in this case, we are going to skip this part of code over here. So the logic behind the continue statement is that whenever a condition meets, it's going to skip the rest of code inside the loop for the current iteration, then it's going to continue to the next iteration. Now the syntax of continue statement for while loop is similar. So in this case, while something is true, we are doing something repeatedly. Then over here, if the condition is met, we are continuing, then we are doing some other thing inside while loop over here. So if this condition met over here, the execution will go to this part. So this means that if condition is met, this part of code do something inside while loop will be skipped. So the rest of code after this if condition over here will be skipped and our loop will continue to the next iteration. So here you need to take into account that the loop does not terminate, it's just continuing to the next iteration. It's just skipping the current iteration and continuing to the next iteration. Now let's see how this is working in practice. So let's say we want to write something printing all numbers from 1 to 10 except 5. So how can we print that? So we know that we can print out all numbers from 1 to 10 by using for loop like this. So I'm going to use for loop with range function. So for num in range starting from 1 till 11 because we want to print out 10 as well. So we have to include 11 over here. 11 will not be included in our print statement. So if I just print num and run our code, you'll see that it's just going to print out all numbers from 1 to 10. But here the question is, when we reach 5 over here, we have to skip it. So how can we do that? We can do it by using continue statement. So if num is equal to 5, we're just going to put continue. So this means that when the number reaches 5, it's going to skip this part of code and continue to the next iteration. So in this case, if I just clear this and run our code, you'll see that first is printing out 1, 2, 3, 4. When it reaches 5, it's continuing to the next iteration, which is 6. So we are skipping 5 over here. Now we can write same code inside while loop like this. So I'm just going to delete this part. So first I'm just going to create a num variable. It's going to equal to 11. Then we can write while loop like this. While num is greater than 0, in this case I'm going to put num minus 1. In each iteration we are going to decrease number by 1. Then we are going to check that if num is equal to 5, so in this case I'm just going to put continue, otherwise we are going to print out num to the console. So if I just clear and run our code, you'll see that in this case it's printing the numbers from 10, 9, 8, 7, then when it reaches 5 over here, it skips this number over here. So that's how continue statement works inside the loop. Now we know that when we use for loop, it iterates over a list or range of numbers until it reaches the end. And similarly, while loop iterates over a block of code until the test expression is false. But sometimes we wish to terminate the current iteration or even the whole loop without checking the test expression. Now we have learned that if we want to terminate the current iteration, in this case we use continue keyword. But the question is, how can we terminate whole loop and continue to the code that is located outside of the loop over here? Now for these cases we use break keyword. Now the syntax of the break keyword for loop is going to be like this. So here you see that one more time we are looping through the list of items and we are doing something with each item over here. So we have a condition inside this loop like this. If this condition is met, we are going to put break over here. Now the question is, after break statement, which part of code will be executed? So we have learned that break statement is responsible for terminating the whole loop. So in this case, if this condition is met, our execution will continue to this part over here. So the rest of items over here will not be looped, and we are not going to do anything with the rest of items. It's just going to continue to the outside of loop, and whatever we have outside of loop is going to execute this part of code. Now similarly, the break syntax for while loop will be like this. So here again, if some condition is true, we are doing something repeatedly. If this condition is met, we are going to put break. So this means that our loop over here will be terminated and the execution will continue to this part of outside of while loop. So whatever we have in the outside of the while loop, we are going to continue to execute that part. Now if you look at this one in the practice, so here if I just write for loop like this, the one that we have written before, num in range between 1 and 11. So in this case, we have written that if num is equal to 5, continue. Otherwise, you are printing out numbers to the console. So if I run it, you will see that it was keeping 5 over here. Now the question is, instead of continue over here, if I put break, what will happen? So this means that it's going to stop execution when it reaches 5. So it's just going to print out all numbers from 1 to 4. So when it reaches 5 over here, and the loop execution terminates over here. Now after loop, if I put something the end and run our code, you will see that after printing out 4, it continues over here. When it reaches 5, it continues the execution part over here, which says the end. So with break statement, we can terminate our loop and continue to outside of loop over here. So with this, we have come to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, we have explained continue and break statements inside loops. So hopefully everything is clear about them.